I chose to camp alone in late September of 2019, right before the cold really started to settle in. I had been feeling tired from work and wanted a break from screens, noise, and people. I drove out to a quiet part of northern Colorado, near an area of forest that wasn't popular with tourists. The air felt sharp and clean when I stepped out of my car, and the sky looked like it had been washed only a few hours earlier. I liked the idea of being completely alone. At the time, I saw it as peaceful. Later, I would think of that same silence in a very different way. I hiked for maybe an hour before choosing a flat spot near a small stream. The water made a soft, rushing sound that repeated over and over, almost like breathing, steady and calm. I set up my tent, spread out my sleeping bag, arranged my food, and made a small fire just to warm myself while I worked. The ground was covered in fallen pine needles and dry leaves that stuck to everything. Even my boots were lined with them by the end. For most of the afternoon, everything felt normal. I walked around the area, collected firewood, checked the stream to see if the water was clean, and watched tiny insects crawl across rocks like nothing in the world could interrupt their tiny routines. I kept telling myself how good it felt to be away from everything. It was one of those quiet days where time feels slower than usual. But around sunset, something shifted. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a feeling. The forest didn't exactly get darker. Sunset always brings that. But the atmosphere felt heavier. The air didn't move. No wind, no rustling branches, no distant animal calls. Just that constant stream noise, but even that sounded too steady, like it was tuned down to a lower volume. I kept glancing around without any clear reason. My eyes wanted something to focus on, but there was nothing. I brushed it off and made myself food, then sat near the fire until the sky turned fully black. Once the heat started dropping hard, I finally got inside my tent and zipped it shut. The nylon walls trapped warmth quickly, and I felt safer in the small space. But even inside, the strange mood outside stayed with me. Usually, when I camp, I can hear something: crickets, distant cracking branches, maybe the sound of an animal somewhere far off. That night felt like someone had taken a thick blanket and wrapped the entire forest under it. Too quiet, too still. Sometime in the night, maybe around 1 a.m., I woke up for no reason. My mind felt clear, not groggy. That bothered me. I usually need noise to sleep, even soft noise, and the quiet pressed down on me until my heart beat faster than it should have for someone lying down. That was when I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, just a single slow step on the dry ground. Dry leaves crushing under weight, not falling naturally from a branch. I held my breath, listening so hard that it almost hurt. Another step, then another. Slow, steady, moving in a curved path around my camp. My tent walls were thin, and the moonlight was weak, but I could see a faint shadow pass across the side of the fabric. The shape stretched tall and narrow, like someone standing upright. My breathing slowed out of pure instinct. My hands went cold. I kept my entire body still so nothing inside the tent would shift or make noise. The steps circled a little more, all at the same slow pace. Leaves moved beneath whatever was out there. Pine needles crushed. The sound wasn't like an animal. Animals were either fast and skittish or heavy and purposeful. This was too controlled. Whoever it was took steps with clear intention. After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped. The silence returned. Total silence, like the forest was waiting. I stayed awake for hours after that, frozen in place. My back ached, my legs tingled, and my jaw was tight from clenching. But I didn't dare move. At some point near dawn, I heard birds again. The forest finally sounded alive. The light outside the tent turned from black to gray, then to a pale early morning blue. Only then did I unzip the tent just a little and peek out. At first glance, everything looked the same. My small fire pit, the stream, the trees. Nothing stood out. But then I noticed the ground around the backside of my tent. Someone had walked in a half circle around it. The prints were clear where the leaves had been crushed into the dirt. They weren't small, maybe men's-sized boots, but the part that hit me hardest was how close they got. The steps came within a few feet of where my head had been lying inside the tent. I tried to convince myself maybe it had been a ranger, someone checking the area. But the region wasn't a patrolled campground, and the prints didn't look like heavy work boots. They looked like regular hiking boots. Someone normal. Someone who should have had no reason to walk silently around a tent at 1 in the morning. I spent the next hour debating whether to pack up right away or act like nothing happened. Part of me worried that if someone had been watching, rushing away would signal panic, and panic might make me look vulnerable. The other part of me couldn't stand the idea of staying any longer. I kept glancing at the tree line, trying to see if anyone was there. I decided to leave, but I tried to do it slowly, like someone who simply woke up early. I broke down the tent, rolled up my sleeping bag, washed my face in the stream, and loaded everything back into my backpack. My hands shook the whole time, but I tried to keep my movements steady. When I finally started hiking back toward where I'd parked, I kept looking behind me every few minutes. The trees all looked the same, but every now and then I felt something unnatural in the air again, like I was being watched. I walked faster but kept my steps quiet without meaning to. I didn't even notice I was doing it. Near the halfway point, the trail twisted between two tall rocks. The space between them was narrow, only wide enough for one person. As I stepped through, I saw something on the ground, fresh boot prints going the same direction I had come from. Same size as the ones near my tent. Same pattern. Someone had been ahead of me at some point. Someone who had walked toward my camp sometime before or after circling it. My chest tightened. I didn't know if the prints were from last night or early that morning, but they were fresh, too fresh to ignore. I pushed through the rest of the hike, never stopping, barely breathing. My throat was dry and my legs burned, but I didn't slow down. By the time I reached my car, my shirt was stuck to my back from sweat, even though the morning was cold. I threw my gear in the back seat without caring how messy it looked. As I closed the door, I scanned the tree line one last time. That same heavy silence from the night before settled around the area again for a moment, like the forest recognized me leaving. Then a slight breeze broke the stillness. I drove away as fast as I safely could, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. Nothing followed. No one stepped out onto the road. No cars appeared behind me. But I didn't feel calm until I reached the highway, miles away from the trail. For days after the trip, I replayed the night in my head. The slow steps, the shadow, the prints. There was no reason for anyone to be out there at that hour, circling a stranger's tent in silence. No reason to track the same trail before or after I passed through. The strange part is that nothing actually happened. No attack, no confrontation, no voice. But sometimes the things that almost happen leave a deeper mark. Knowing someone was out there, moving with such control, staying so close without making a sound, felt worse than anything else. In the end, I understood something very clearly. Real danger doesn't always show itself directly. Sometimes it just watches, waits, and walks away before you ever see its face. And that unknown, that silent presence, is what stays with you long after you're safely home. I still camp sometimes, but never alone anymore. And every night when I zip up my tent, I listen carefully to the sounds around me. As long as I can hear the wind, insects, or the rush of water, I feel grounded. But the moment the world goes quiet in that unnatural way, I remember that night, and I know exactly what that kind of silence means. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it was already the summer of 2017. I had been itching for a break from the city, so I packed up my old Subaru and headed for the northern part of Vermont, somewhere deep in the Green Mountains. I was 28 at the time, and my golden retriever, Max, had been my companion for nearly 8 years. He wasn't just a dog. He was a shadow that followed me everywhere, and I trusted him with my life. I found a small clearing off a dirt road that seemed almost hidden from the main path. The area wasn't marked on the map I had, which I liked. It meant fewer people. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and fallen branches, and a thin stream ran nearby, reflecting the late afternoon sun. The forest around was dense, trees stretching tall and close, their leaves thick enough to make the shadows stretch unnaturally even in daylight. I parked the car and let Max out, watching him bound over the underbrush like a golden streak. I set up my tent first, choosing a spot where the ground was firm, but not too close to the stream. Max stayed close, sniffing around, his ears perked for any sign of wildlife. I unpacked my gear and built a small fire pit with stones I found scattered around. As the sun sank lower, I gathered some firewood, noting how quiet it was. There were no cars, no voices, just the occasional rustle of leaves or bird calls. First, it was peaceful. By the time I started cooking dinner, the sky had turned a deep orange, the kind that makes everything look unreal. Max lay nearby, half in the sun, half in the shadow of the trees, his tail wagging lazily. I kept glancing around, half expecting someone to appear from the trees, but there was nothing. Dinner went quietly, and after eating, I washed up in the stream. The water was cold but refreshing. Max drank greedily, shaking the droplets off his fur, sending a fine mist into the air. Night came fast. The forest transformed into something entirely different. Sounds I had ignored during the day became eerie. The wind through the branches sounded like whispers, and distant animals made sharp, sudden noises that made me jump. Max, normally calm, began growling low in his throat, ears pinned back, hackles raised. I followed his gaze into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything at first. Then I noticed movement, something sliding silently between the trees, just at the edge of my flashlight's reach. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or a fox, but the way it moved, careful, deliberate, almost human in its pauses, made my stomach knot. I crouched near the fire, Max at my side, keeping my small lantern lit. Every now and then, I'd see a flicker of shadow, always just at the edge of my vision. My mind raced through possibilities. Hunters, lost hikers, or worse, but I couldn't hear voices. There was no sound except the occasional snap of a branch, but even that seemed timed, deliberate. Around midnight, Max's growling intensified. He suddenly bolted to the edge of the clearing, barking furiously. I grabbed my flashlight and followed, heart pounding. I shone the beam into the darkness, but again, I saw nothing. The noise from Max seemed to attract whatever it was. I felt rather than saw movement, a large, dark shape shifting behind the trees. My first instinct was to grab him and run, but Max refused to leave, barking and growling, his body tense. I decided to go back to the tent, thinking maybe whatever it was would go away. Max stayed close, circling the perimeter of the campsite. I tried to settle, but sleep was impossible. Every snap, every rustle made my heart jump. I kept the fire burning high, knowing that light and warmth were my only barriers against the dark. Hours passed like that. Eventually, I dozed intermittently, only to wake again at strange intervals, always to the feeling of being watched. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard it clearly. Not the rustling of leaves, not a branch snapping. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over twigs and leaves. They weren't close yet, but they were getting closer. I froze, Max growling low and rumbling, a warning. I gripped my hunting knife, wishing I had brought my gun. The footsteps stopped abruptly, just beyond the firelight. I could see nothing, but I could feel it, the presence, heavy and deliberate, just outside the glow. I whispered for Max to stay, though I knew he wouldn't leave my side. The silence stretched unbearably long. Then the footsteps moved again, circling the tent, slow, careful, deliberate. Max barked sharply and ran to the edge of the firelight, but I held him back. Whatever it was, it didn't want to reveal itself fully. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. I realized then that I was completely alone with this unknown entity, with nothing but a small fire and my instincts to protect me. I decided I couldn't stay. I waited until I thought it had moved away slightly, then grabbed my backpack, slipped on my boots, and prepared to make a run for the car. Max followed instantly, sticking close. I moved slowly at first, testing the ground, listening to every sound. I caught glimpses of shadows moving just beyond the trees, always keeping pace with me, but never stepping fully into the light. I ran when I thought I could, Max at my side, the firelight shrinking behind me. It took nearly half an hour to reach the car, through uneven ground, over fallen logs, past the stream, through underbrush that clawed at my arms and legs. I didn't stop running until the Subaru was in sight. I slammed the door shut, Max jumping inside immediately, ears pinned back and body trembling. I locked the doors and started the engine, the rumble echoing through the trees. I drove slowly at first, then faster, trying to shake the feeling of eyes watching me from every darkened corner. When I finally reached the main road, the lights from passing cars felt like a revelation. I didn't stop until I was out of the mountains entirely, back on familiar highways. Max lay quietly beside me, exhausted but alert. I didn't speak. Words felt useless. The fear had etched itself into me, a memory that wouldn't fade. The next day, I called the local ranger station, asking about the area I had camped in. They told me it was rarely used, and sometimes people reported sightings of illegal hunters or poachers, people who lurked in the forest waiting for trespassers. They cautioned me never to camp there alone again. Even now, years later, I remember every detail. The shape of the clearing, the way the trees leaned, the sound of twigs breaking under invisible footsteps, Max's growl, the cold air thick with tension. Camping had always been my escape, my solace. But that night reminded me that the wilderness, though beautiful, can hold dangers you can't see until it's almost too late. Max and I survived, and we came back stronger, more careful and wary. But I'll never forget how real fear can feel when the forest itself seems alive, watching you, waiting. From that day on, I never went into unknown woods alone. Max still accompanies me on every trip, a silent guardian. And every time I set up a campfire, I remember that night, the shadow just at the edge of the light, and the way the world felt too large, too quiet, and dangerously close to something I wasn't ready to face. I drove out to a quiet farming area in southern Illinois in the late summer of 2019. I was 24 then, restless and tired of the noise of the city, and I wanted a place where I could breathe for a few days. A coworker had told me about an old family-owned farm that allowed people to camp on the far side of their land. The farm was mostly corn and soy fields with a few wooded patches on the edges. It sounded perfect for a weekend alone, and I didn't overthink anything. I just packed my tent, some cheap camping gear, and a cooler with food, then left early in the morning. By the time I reached the long dirt road leading to the farm, the sun was already burning in the sky. Dust rose behind my car as I drove slowly across the uneven road. The main house looked old but well-kept, with white paint that was peeling near the bottom edges and a tin roof that glimmered in the sunlight. Behind it were large barns, tall silos, and big farming machines parked in crooked positions that made them look abandoned even though they probably still worked. Someone had placed a small wooden sign near the side of the driveway, pointing to the camping area about a mile out behind the last row of crops. The land felt wide and empty in a strange way. Even though I could see endless fields stretching across the distance, it didn't feel peaceful the way I expected. It felt too open, too quiet, like the silence had weight. But I ignored that feeling, thinking it was just the difference between the city and the countryside. The camping area was nothing more than a patch of rough grass beside a weathered line of pine trees. Behind the trees, the fields dropped into a wide stretch of tall corn that moved in slow waves whenever the wind blew. There was an old shed beside the pines, leaning forward as if it might fall any second. Its faded red paint and sagging roof made it look like no one had touched it for years. I parked a little distance away from it and set up my tent near the edge of the trees so I could get some shade. The air smelled like earth and dry corn leaves. Bugs buzzed lazily around my arms. Sweat collected on my neck as I hammered the tent stakes into the ground. Everything around me felt calm but empty, like the world had been paused. After I set up, I walked around the edge of the trees. The dirt was soft and uneven. Old footprints and tire tracks from tractors ran in different directions, some of them half erased by rain and time. The shed door was half open, and even from a distance I could see the darkness inside. Something about that shed made the back of my neck tighten, but I didn't want to act paranoid over nothing, so I turned away and went back to my tent. The afternoon passed slowly. I ate a sandwich, drank warm water from a bottle, and lay on my sleeping bag as the heat filled the tent. I could hear the wind brushing through the corn and the distant hum of insects. Once in a while, I thought I heard something else, something that didn't belong, short, sharp sounds like quick steps on dry grass. Every time I sat up and listened closely, everything turned silent again. The longer I stayed, the more I felt like someone else was nearby, but the fields were empty every time I checked. By evening, the sky turned orange and the heat slowly faded. I built a small fire in a ring of stones someone had made before me. I sat on the ground watching the flames crackle, the smoke twisting into the air. The shadows around the trees grew darker, and the shed looked even more out of place as the last bit of daylight slipped away. I tried to enjoy the calm, but the quietness felt unnatural. Even the insects seemed less active than earlier. As night settled fully across the fields, the barn lights in the distance were the only signs of life. Everything else fell into a heavy darkness. I went into the tent, zipped it closed, and lay down. The fabric walls moved slightly with each gust of wind. I stared at the ceiling, trying to relax, but my mind kept drifting back to the shed and those strange, quick noises from earlier. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that farms have animals, raccoons, stray dogs, plenty of things that wander around at night. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again. I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep, but something felt different. The air in the tent felt colder. The wind outside was gone. Everything was too still. As I lay there, I heard a soft crunch outside, like a shoe pressing down on dry grass. Then another one, slow and spaced out. Someone was walking around my campsite. I held my breath and listened. The steps moved around the side of the tent, slow and careful. I could hear the faint sound of breathing, not mine, something steady and close. My chest felt tight, and all I could do was stay still. The footsteps stopped right outside, only a few feet from my head. The tent walls were too thin, and I felt exposed, like nothing was separating me from whoever was out there. After a long moment, the steps moved again, this time toward the trees. I heard the sound of something brushing against the pine branches. I stayed frozen for a full minute until the noise faded. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but the steps were too slow, too heavy, too human. My thoughts raced, but I didn't dare move. I didn't sleep again that night. I just waited in silence, listening to the darkness. Every tiny sound felt like a threat. At one point, I thought I heard something shifting inside the shed, a dull creak like wood bending. Maybe I imagined it, maybe I didn't, but it kept me awake until the sky finally began to lighten hours later. When the sun rose, I left the tent immediately. The grass around my campsite had flattened marks leading away toward the shed. They were not from animals. They were controlled, even steps. My stomach twisted as I followed them with my eyes. The shed door, which had been half open the day before, was now wide open. The inside looked darker than before, like the shadows clung to the walls. I didn't go near it. I didn't want to know what or who had been inside. I packed my things as fast as I could. My hands shook while I rolled up the sleeping bag. The quiet morning didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the land was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. As I carried the last of my gear to the car, I felt a strong sense that someone was watching me. I didn't see anyone among the rows of corn or near the trees, but the feeling wouldn't leave my mind. When I finally started the engine, I didn't look back at the shed or the campsite. I just drove down the dirt road, faster than I probably should have. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. Only then did my body slowly relax. The fields, the shed, the quiet steps in the night, they all felt far away, but the fear stayed in my chest. I knew what I heard. I knew the difference between an animal and a person. Someone had been walking around my tent, watching me while I slept in the middle of that empty farmland. I never went back to that farm. I didn't contact the owners or ask them if someone else had been out there. I didn't want to know. Sometimes I think about the shed and the wide open fields and how easy it would be for someone to hide out there without anyone noticing. I think about how close they came to my tent, how still the night became when they stood outside. The ending was simple for me. I got away. I left before anything worse could happen. But what stays with me is the knowledge that someone else was out there that night, moving slowly in the dark, silently watching me on that lonely patch of farmland. And the scariest part is knowing that if I hadn't woken up when I did, I might never have realized they were there at all. I had always loved the quiet of the wilderness. By 2017, I was 24, freshly out of college, and itching for a solo escape to clear my head. I picked a small national forest in northern Montana, nowhere near the popular trails, just miles of untouched trees and hidden lakes. I drove in late in the afternoon, my old pickup rattling over the dirt road, and parked near a narrow clearing where the underbrush had been cut back enough to pitch a tent. I had my usual gear: a tent, sleeping bag, backpack with food and water, a small cooking stove, and my flashlight, though I had a feeling I'd barely need it until night fully fell. Setting up camp was peaceful. The sun was low, streaking gold across the tall pine trees, their long shadows stretching across the ground. I stacked firewood I had gathered, arranging it neatly near the cleared fire pit. I decided to cook a simple meal: instant noodles, a can of beans, and some trail mix, while soaking in the silence. Occasionally, a bird would call, or a chipmunk would rustle through the leaves, but otherwise nothing moved. The kind of quiet that can make you feel small, but in a comforting way. Night fell quickly, earlier than I expected. By 8 p.m., the sky was a deep navy, sprinkled with stars so bright it felt like the forest itself was glowing. I sat by the fire, letting the heat chase away the chill that crept into my fingers. Around me, the trees loomed, black shapes against the night. Every now and then, I thought I saw shadows moving just beyond the firelight, but I chalked it up to my eyes adjusting and the wind shifting branches. Then I heard it, a snap. Not close, not alarmingly loud, but clear. Someone or something moving among the trees, and it didn't sound like an animal. Deer and elk made light, cautious steps. This snap was deliberate, heavy, and deliberate. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was probably a hiker or another camper. I was in a remote area, yes, but not that remote. I tried to ignore it, but then the sound repeated, closer this time. Twigs cracking under deliberate, heavy footsteps, slow but unmistakably human. I felt a cold rush of fear. My mind raced through every warning I'd read about camping alone in Montana. Break-ins, attacks, people getting lost or hurt. I leaned forward slightly, straining to see through the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. And then I saw him, or at least a shape, dark, taller than me, standing just at the edge of the fire's glow. He didn't move at first, just watching. My stomach sank. He wasn't wearing anything bright, no reflective patches, just dark clothes blending into the night. I couldn't see a face, but the weight of his presence felt heavy, calculated. I had no plan for a situation like this. I wasn't carrying a gun, only a small pocket knife I used for cooking prep. The first thing I did was stay still. My instincts told me not to run, not to make noise, just to observe and see if he moved away. For what felt like 10 minutes, we stayed locked in that quiet stare, him barely visible in the shadows, and me sitting by my fire with every nerve screaming. Then he moved, slowly, and I noticed something odd. He wasn't just walking. He was circling, keeping just out of the firelight, testing the perimeter. I realized I was in his territory, not mine. My pulse thumped painfully in my ears. My mind raced through possibilities. Was he lost? Was he watching me for sport? Was he dangerous? I'd read enough reports to know that people who follow campers at night usually weren't friendly. I decided I had to make a move, but careful. I quietly unzipped my backpack and found my small can of bear spray. Not ideal against a human, but better than nothing. I crouched low, ready, listening to the leaves crunch softly under his feet as he circled. He paused suddenly, like he heard me moving. My stomach dropped. Then, without warning, he shifted. I couldn't see his face, but I felt his gaze move directly to me. My mind screamed, "Run!" But instinct and fear held me frozen. And then I remembered my truck, the only escape route. I could make it there in under 30 seconds if I timed it right. I waited. My ears picked up his next step, the crack of a branch that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He moved closer to the side of my fire, and I knew I had only one chance. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, pointing the beam directly at him, and yelled as loudly as I could, hoping to startle him. The beam hit his face, and I finally saw him clearly. He was younger than I thought, maybe in his early 30s, scruffy, eyes wide. Not friendly, not playful, but calculating, like he was weighing me. He froze. My yell echoed through the trees. Then I ran, straight past the fire, straight into the shadows. He yelled something behind me, but I didn't look back. The adrenaline carried me over rocks, roots, and underbrush until I reached my truck. I fumbled with the keys, heart pounding in my ears so loud it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I finally got the door open, threw myself inside, locked it, and started the engine. The headlights pierced the darkness, and for a brief second, I thought I saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me go. But when I blinked, he was gone. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station on the edge of the forest, nearly 20 miles away. My hands shook so badly I could barely fill my tank. I called the local ranger station, explained what happened, and they promised to check the area, though they couldn't guarantee anything that night. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and for weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the image of that man circling my campsite, the way he had moved silently among the trees, like he was part of the forest itself. I went back to camping later, but never alone, never without someone knowing exactly where I was. And I always kept a flashlight in my hand, ready to run. Looking back, I realized I had been lucky. I hadn't done anything overtly wrong. No bright lights, no loud noises, but being alone, unprepared for another human in the wilderness, had left me vulnerable. That night taught me more than any book or guide ever could. The forest isn't dangerous because of ghosts or wild animals. It's dangerous because it's unpredictable. And people can be just as unpredictable as the wilderness itself. Years later, I still drive that same stretch of forest road sometimes, but I never camp alone. I always leave an itinerary, carry extra gear, and trust my instincts. And I never forget the feeling of being watched, circling in the shadows, by someone who could have been just like me or far worse. I had been driving for almost 12 hours when I finally turned off the narrow highway and followed a dirt road that cut through the pine forest. It was late August of 2019, and I had taken a week off from work because I felt like I was burning out. I was 26 at the time, tired from long shifts, tired from staring at screens, tired of hearing people complain about things that didn't matter. I wanted silence, open space, and a place that didn't buzz with electricity every second. So I planned a solo camping trip across a few states, starting with a spot in northern Idaho that someone online had said was quiet, empty, and perfect for getting away. I should have known that anything described that way usually comes with a good reason behind the emptiness. The sun was dropping lower as I parked near a clearing surrounded by tall pines. There were no other cars, no campers, not even any old fire pits or signs that people used the area often. I liked that at first. The air was cold even though it was still summer, and it carried this sharp smell of pine needles and damp earth. I could hear nothing besides the distant sound of wind dragging itself through the treetops. After hours of radio noise and engine hum, the silence felt almost heavy. I set up my tent on a small patch of flat ground. The soil was soft, dark, and scattered with old needles. I kept thinking how untouched everything looked, almost like the place hadn't seen people in years. I walked around the clearing while there was still some light left, stretching my legs, trying to loosen up the stiffness in my back. I noticed that a thin trail continued past the clearing and disappeared into the trees. It looked barely used, but something about the uneven, narrow line made me feel uneasy. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just fatigue making me paranoid. When the sun finally slipped behind the tree line, the temperature dropped fast. I lit a small fire and cooked a quick meal, mostly to warm myself. The sky turned this deep navy blue, and stars began to spill across it. I thought I would enjoy the quiet, but there was something strange about that silence now. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. While I ate, I kept glancing toward the trail. I don't know why. My brain just kept returning to it. The deeper it got into the night, the more I felt like the trees were a wall and the darkness beyond them was thicker than any night I had camped in before. I tried to focus on the fire, on the simple crackling sound of wood breaking down into glowing dust, but it didn't help. When I finally put the fire out and crawled into my tent, I expected to fall asleep quickly from the long day of driving. Instead, I lay awake, listening. The ground felt cold beneath my sleeping pad. The darkness inside the tent was complete. Every sound outside seemed unnatural somehow. Small snaps, soft shuffles, distant creaks. I kept telling myself it was just animals. Nothing unusual for a forest in the middle of nowhere. But the longer I listened, the more I felt like the sounds weren't random movements. They came in bursts, then stopped completely, as if something was staying still for long stretches of time. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I remembered was waking up suddenly in the dark. I didn't know what time it was, but the cold inside the tent was sharper than before. My breath felt thick in the air. The forest outside was silent again, but not the same silence as earlier. This time it felt like something heavy was sitting right outside the tent, not touching it, just existing there, blocking everything else out. My heart rate climbed fast. I tried to stay still and let my eyes adjust, even though I couldn't see anything. I had this strong sense that I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling wasn't like the usual fear of being in a dark forest. It felt targeted, like the dark itself was aware of me. I slowly reached for my phone and checked the time. It was 3:14 a.m. No signal, of course. I turned the screen back off and listened harder. For a few minutes, there was absolutely nothing. No wind, no animals, not even distant rustling. Then I heard something faint, maybe 50 feet away, moving slowly through the undergrowth. It wasn't walking on four legs. The weight of each step was spaced differently, like something walking upright. The steps were inconsistent, slow, almost cautious. I could feel my chest tightening. I didn't know whether to unzip the tent and look or stay curled inside. Every instinct told me to stay hidden, but hiding inside a thin nylon shell felt pointless. The steps stopped. There was nothing again. Then a soft grinding sound came from the direction of the trail. It sounded like metal scraping against wood. Not fast, but long and steady, as if someone were dragging something. I swallowed hard, trying not to make a sound. I waited for the noise to continue, but after a few seconds, it stopped too. I lay there for what felt like hours, barely breathing. Eventually, exhaustion forced my eyes to close, even though my mind screamed not to fall asleep. When I woke up again, sunlight was filtering through the tent fabric, soft and pale. The forest was silent, but in a natural morning way now, not the dead stillness of the night. I stepped outside, shivering from the cold. The air smelled the same, but the clearing felt different, like the tension from the night had seeped into the ground. I checked around my campsite, looking for prints or signs of animals. The dirt near the trail was disturbed in several spots, but not in a way I could identify. It didn't look like paw marks, and it didn't look like boot tracks either. Just long smudged impressions, like someone had been dragging something heavy. I followed the marks for a few feet until they blended into the forest floor. The trail looked the same as always, thin and dark, leading deeper into the trees. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach just looking at it. During the day, it looked harmless enough, but after last night, it felt like the trail was hiding something behind its darkness. I didn't bother making breakfast. I packed my gear as fast as I could. My hands were shaking the whole time, and every few seconds I checked the tree line, expecting to see someone standing between the trunks. The fear from the night hadn't faded with the daylight. It had settled deeper, like something had watched me while I slept. When I finally got into my car and started driving back toward the highway, I felt like the forest was watching me leave. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out into the road. The hairs on my arms didn't ease down until I reached the main highway and saw another car for the first time in over a day. I didn't tell anyone exactly what happened. I just said the place made me uncomfortable and I left early. But the truth stayed with me. It wasn't the kind of fear that comes from seeing something dangerous. It was the kind that comes from not seeing it. The kind that sits in the back of your mind, reminding you that there are places where people don't go anymore for reasons that never make it into guidebooks. Places where the silence feels too deliberate, the trails too untouched, and the nights too long. It took me a long time to accept that nothing supernatural happened. Nothing impossible. What I heard out there was real. Someone was in those woods with me, moving slowly through the dark, dragging something along the ground. Someone who knew that place better than I did. Someone who stopped just close enough to listen to me inside my tent. To this day, the worst part isn't the sounds I heard. The worst part is the thought of what might have happened if I had unzipped the tent, even just an inch to look outside. I wasn't planning to camp that night. I had been driving since early morning through northern Oregon, following a route I found online that promised quiet forests and empty trails. I was 24 that year, and I liked the idea of being alone in the woods, far from noise and people. But by the time evening came, the sky had turned heavy and dark, and the rain started to fall in slow, thick drops that made the road feel smaller and more dangerous every mile. I didn't want to keep driving through the storm, and I didn't want to spend money on a motel either. So I took the next forest road and followed it into a patch of pine woods that looked mostly untouched. I found a flat spot not too far from the tree line. It was already muddy, but not enough to trap the car. I parked, grabbed my backpack, and started setting up my tent. The rain had become steady by then, the kind that soaked through your jacket no matter how new it was. My hands were cold and stiff, and the ground felt like wet sponge, but I pushed through because I just wanted shelter. When the tent was finally up, I crawled inside, changed into dry clothes, and listened to the storm build. There was no wind at first, just the rain hitting every surface, the tarp, the leaves, the dirt. The sound made everything outside feel distant, like I had dropped into a world that wasn't connected to anything else. I felt calm for a while. I ate something simple, stretched out on my sleeping bag, and tried to relax. But I kept hearing small noises outside the tent, tiny shifts in the wet ground, faint cracks in the brush. At first I thought it was the usual forest animals moving around, but the longer I lay there, the more I noticed a strange pattern. The sounds came, then stopped, then came again, closer each time. I told myself I was imagining it because of the rain, because sound travels weird when the forest is soaked, but something about it made my stomach feel tight. The cold air became worse as the night grew deeper. The tent walls shook lightly as the wind finally woke up. The rain became harder and sharper, hitting like gravel instead of water. The forest started to creak around me, old branches bending under the weight of water. Every now and then I heard the distant thump of something falling. Maybe loose bark, maybe a dead limb tearing free. Each noise reminded me that I was alone out there, miles from anyone, with nothing between me and the forest except thin fabric. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. My thoughts kept drifting back to the slow, careful steps I thought I heard earlier. So I stayed awake, listening. Hours passed like that. The rain still hammered overhead, and I lay still, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent. Then I heard it again. A soft shift, heavier than an animal, pressing into the earth, came from the left side of the tent. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my chest. I held my breath without meaning to. Another step followed, then another. They were slow, almost testing the ground. Whoever or whatever was moving outside wasn't stumbling. They were placing each foot carefully, like they wanted to stay quiet. I didn't move. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, or maybe a large raccoon digging around. But the steps were too steady, too controlled, and too heavy. I stayed frozen, breathing as quietly as I could. The steps circled the tent, stopping behind it, then shifting again to the right side. I pictured someone standing there in the dark rain, only a few feet from me, just listening to my breathing. The idea made a sharp, cold rush through my whole body. The storm grew louder for a while, and the footsteps faded. I didn't know if they had left or if the noise was just covering them. At some point, the exhaustion in my body won, and I must have fallen into a half-sleep. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up suddenly when I heard something dragging over the ground. The sound was slow and rough, like something heavy being pulled through wet dirt. It started far away, but it got closer inch by inch. I felt frozen again, staring up at the tent ceiling in the darkness, unable to make sense of it. The dragging stopped when it reached somewhere near my camp. Then there was silence, long, deep silence. Not even the usual night animals made noise anymore. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I didn't move. I didn't even shift my weight. I lay entirely still, trying to hear anything through the pounding rain. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. My body ached from staying still, but I didn't want to make a single sound. Eventually, the dragging noise started again, moving away this time, slow and steady, until it faded completely. I didn't trust it. Something about it felt wrong, too purposeful, too controlled, like someone was pulling something heavy they didn't want anyone to see. I waited until the first faint light of dawn showed through the tent walls. The storm was finally dying down, the rain softer, the forest waking up again. I forced myself to unzip the tent. The cold morning air hit my face, and I stepped out onto the soaked ground. Everything looked gray and washed out. The soil around my tent was covered in strange impressions. Not footsteps exactly, but deep marks, like someone had been kneeling or pressing something into the earth. I followed the trail of disturbed ground a little way from my camp. The mud was torn up, showing the path of whatever had been dragged. The trail led deeper into the trees, but I didn't follow it far. I stopped when I reached a spot where the earth was dug up in wide patches. Something had been buried there recently, the soil still loose and uneven. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand if it was an animal or something else. The shape was too big, too irregular, and too strangely placed to make sense. I didn't want to go closer. I didn't want to know. Everything in me told me to leave. My chest felt tight the whole walk back to my tent. I packed fast, stuffing my wet gear into the car. I didn't care about folding anything. I just wanted to get out of that forest. As I drove away, I kept looking at the mirror, half expecting someone to step out of the trees and watch me leave. When I finally reached the main road, I felt like I could breathe again. The rain had stopped, the daylight brighter, and the world felt alive and normal. Nothing like the heavy silence of the night before. But even now, when I think about that muddy patch of earth and the slow dragging sounds, a chill runs through me. I know there was someone out there that night, someone moving through the rain with something heavy, someone who walked right around my tent and listened to me breathe. I didn't report it. I didn't take photos. I didn't go back. I just drove home and tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, when rain hits my window in that same steady rhythm, I remember the soft steps circling me in the dark. And I know that if I had stepped outside my tent at the wrong moment, if I had made one noise too loud, I might have ended up as another patch of loose earth in that silent, soaked forest. And that is the reason I never camp alone anymore. Not because of ghosts or strange creatures, but because there are real people out there, hidden in the rain and the trees, doing things you don't ever want to understand, and the darkness of the forest gives them all the cover they need. I drove out to the old Black Pine Quarry in northern Idaho in late August of 2019, just after my 23rd birthday. I had been wanting a quiet weekend away from people, away from screens, away from everything that made my head feel noisy. The quarry had been shut down years before I was even born. Most people avoided it now because the ground was unstable, the trails were washed out, and the place had a reputation for being unsafe. But I wanted something silent and empty, somewhere I could breathe without hearing traffic or neighbors yelling. So I packed my tent, my old sleeping bag, a small cooler, and planned to stay one night. I told myself I could handle one night alone anywhere. The drive took hours. The last stretch of road was nothing more than a narrow dirt track with deep grooves carved by past rain. My car shook the whole time, and dust covered every surface inside. I kept checking the clock on my dashboard, wanting to reach before sunset. When the trees thinned and the ground fell away into the wide pit of the quarry, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The place looked abandoned in the worst kind of way. Rusted metal frames sticking out of the dirt, old tire tracks filled with standing water, and hills of loose stones that looked ready to slide down at the smallest touch. I parked near a flat spot a little higher up, far from the steep edges but still close enough to see the quarry floor. I set my tent near a patch of dry grass. The air smelled sharp, like dust and hot rocks. Even in the fading light, everything looked washed out, like the whole place had been left under a heat lamp for too long. After setting up my camp, I walked around the area just to get a sense of the layout. There were old pieces of machinery left behind, broken and rusting. A large conveyor frame leaned sideways like a skeleton. Metal scraps stuck out of the dirt. The ground dipped and rose unpredictably. I remember seeing a black boot print in a patch of clay near a puddle that didn't look fresh but didn't look very old either. It wasn't mine. That stuck in my mind more than I wanted to admit. I tried to push it away by telling myself hunters or hikers probably came through here sometimes. By the time the sun dropped behind the trees, the temperature fell quickly. I lit my little camp stove, heated some canned soup, and ate sitting on a folding chair. The quiet was heavier than I expected. Even the insects were strangely muted. The only sound was the occasional creak of the cooling metal from my car. Every time the noise broke the silence, I felt a jolt run through me. When it finally got dark, it got extremely dark. The quarry had no lights anywhere, and the sky clouded over, hiding the moon. My small lantern barely reached a few feet past my tent. Everything else around me looked like a wall of black space. I tried to relax and lie down, but the ground under my tent felt uneven. I shifted my sleeping bag several times. My nerves wouldn't settle. I kept thinking about the shape of that boot print, how deep it was, how the edges didn't look as weathered as everything else. I tried forcing my mind onto something else, but the silence pressed against my ears so hard that my thoughts kept circling back to it. Around what I guessed was midnight, I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't natural either. A single hard crack of stone against stone, echoing off the quarry walls. I froze in my sleeping bag. I tried to tell myself rocks slide on their own all the time. The place was unstable. Maybe the wind loosened something, but there was no wind. The air felt completely still. A few minutes passed. Then another sound. This one closer. Not a crack this time. More like the crunch of gravel under a foot. I held my breath without thinking. I waited, hoping it was an animal, but the steps came in slow, uneven patterns, like someone trying to move quietly but not caring enough to hide everything. I lifted my head just slightly, feeling my heartbeat hammer inside my throat. My tent walls looked thin in the darkness. My lantern was switched off because I never sleep with it on, so I couldn't see anything outside except the vague shape of the zipper area. Then the steps stopped. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Not outside and barely inside my chest. I had the sickening sense that someone was standing right beyond the thin fabric of my tent. I didn't hear breathing, but I could feel the presence, that heavy tension you feel when a person stands too close behind you. I stayed completely still. Every muscle in my body locked up. The silence stretched on so long that I started wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the sound came from farther away. Maybe I misheard. My mind tried to grasp any explanation that didn't include another human being standing outside my tent at midnight in an abandoned quarry. Just when I started to believe I had scared myself for nothing, I heard it. The faint scrape of something dragging lightly across the outside of my tent wall. A slow, thin sound, like a fingertip or a nail brushing fabric. My skin felt like it pulled tight against my bones. I didn't move at all. I didn't breathe for several seconds. The dragging stopped. Then, without warning, quick, heavy steps moved away from the tent, running but not in a straight line. More like moving from one point to another across the loose gravel, then stopping again. I lay there listening to the sounds fade and then return from different angles. It was like someone was circling the camp but staying out of my direct view. I didn't dare open the tent or look outside. I didn't want to see anything. I didn't want anything to see me. Maybe half an hour passed. Maybe more. Time didn't feel real. The footsteps eventually drifted farther and farther away until I couldn't hear them anymore. I waited even longer. I stayed awake until dawn, lying there stiff and alert, staring at the ceiling of the tent even when my eyes felt like they were burning. When the light finally rose and the sky turned pale gray, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air felt cold and wet. My shirt clung to my back from sweating all night. The ground around my tent had prints in the dirt. Not animal prints, shoe prints, different from mine, wider, heavier. They circled the tent in uneven arcs. One set came close, too close, almost touching the edge of my tent's footprint. There were drag marks too, thin streaks in the dust near one side of the tent. I didn't want to think about what made them. I packed my things fast, shoving gear into the car with shaking hands. Every sound I made felt too loud. I kept glancing up the quarry slopes, expecting to see someone standing there. The entire place felt wrong now, like the air carried something left over from the night. The last thing I noticed before driving away was a crushed water bottle near one of the old metal beams. Half buried, but definitely not mine. Its plastic looked too new. I hadn't seen it the day before when I walked around. Someone else had been there, someone who didn't want to be seen. When I finally reached the main road, the tension in my chest loosened a little, but the fear stayed. It stayed for weeks. Every time I tried to sleep after that trip, I remembered the sound of gravel shifting under someone's weight and the slow scrape along the side of my tent. The ending is simple and real. Nothing supernatural. No mystery monster. Just the reality that the most dangerous thing in the dark is another person who shouldn't be there. I never went back to Black Pine Quarry, and I never camped alone again.